It's Friday and it is 4th of July weekend. So for you that love to drink, this is, I guess, a weekend to, party hard and have a good time. Just be safe, having said that. But for people like me that really can't drink more than a glass of wine, these weekends suck because I get depressed because I'm like, I can't even drink like other people can, and have a great old time. Plus, I'm brown. And the problem is I can't even go on a goddamn boat because I'm trying to get to be fairer. So so I don't know. I'm thinking about maybe buying. I really seriously thought about those like the 4-track vehicles, right?
Yeah.
The tracks, right, with the 4 things. I literally went and looked at that one. No, not a dirt bike. It's called a side by side.
Yeah.
I thought about going and buying a side by side like last weekend, right? I was so excited. I'm like, oh my God. I could never afford that at one time. Now I can, So I was like, maybe I should buy one of those and a jet ski. But then I don't want to get any darker. But it's time for story time today. So, on every Friday, we try to bring you a story that's hopefully some sort of a thing that's motivational, inspirational, something where we can look back at our own lives and, have a chance to laugh about it. And I've told you guys stories about kind of how I met Mike Ferry. And for everybody, we have a figure in our lives. We have somebody that we look up to. We have somebody that has a successful business. And we look at the person as larger than life, right? For me, it happened to be Mike Ferry. And for those of you guys that don't know now, Mike is, I'm saying this, old guy out of due respect to Mr. Mike. But Mike still does real estate seminars for real estate agents, meaning how to sell a lot of real estate. And I started going to his seminars when I was about 19 or 20 years old. And I think I've shared this story that through meeting different people, being exposed to different things, that puts in your mind what is possible for you. And for me, that was kind of a couple of incidents that happened. And maybe today, how life is, that something happens and you remember it a lot more than what it is. But I'll never forget this. At the time, I used to live in Pittsburgh, and I still remember up in Cranberry Township is where I used to live, which is north part of Pittsburgh, above North Hills. And I used to drive down on weekends to Pittsburgh downtown, and there was a Rolls-Royce dealership. I don't know if it's there still or not. There was a building, this big, huge building called One Oxford Place. Maybe if some of you are from Pittsburgh, you'll know where I'm talking about, point of reference. And I still remember I used to park here. Across the street, there was this store with Rolls-Royce store at the time, right, dealership. I don't even remember if it was a brand new ones or old ones, but for all I remember is it was very expensive cars, right? And I didn't have the guts to go there during the day because I thought I would walk in and they knew I was a broke young man, broke young guy. I'm not sure if that was written on my forehead, but it was certainly written inside my mind. So I didn't have the guts to go there today. But I used to go there at night a lot of the times, right? I remember there used to be this shop where you could get this kind of like a fajita, Indian fajita, $4 or $5, whatever it was. And then I would go sit in front of the thing and look at the Rolls-Royce store. And then I would go and peek through the glass. And there were all these expensive cars. And at the time, I don't even know what a Rolls-Royce cost at that time. I have no idea. This is 20-something years ago, but I'm sure it was a couple, $250,000 or something at least. Because today it's about $400,000, right? A Ghost. And I used to try to figure out, I still remember sitting with a small calculator and trying to figure out how much a payment would be on a Rolls Royce, how much money you would have to make to be able to back end into what a payment would be. And I will And I still remember this, that when you hear a motivational recording, all this kind of stuff, right? They say you have to write your goals down. You have to write your goals down. And I remember making a business plan, and my business plan was this: that someday, right? I had no idea. Someday I'm going to earn $1 million. This was my business plan, and every month I'm going to be able to save $10,000. At the time, I had no concept of cash flow, right? I hadn't graduated mentally in that level, but that I'm going to be able to save $10,000. And so I was like, okay, for the year, then I'm going to be able to save $120,000. Then I'm going to invest it. This was how I was, and I was trying to figure out, okay, if I'm able to save that, how long would it take me after tax to be able to buy a Rolls Royce, and could I afford the payments? And that math never used to work out for me at the time, because I'm like, this just seems impossible. And I was like, I don't know how it's possible, but one day, right? This is going to happen. And funny thing would happen. I've told you guys the story about going to Mike Ferry's first event in Pittsburgh. I used to live in Morgantown, drove up to Pittsburgh to go to Mike's first event. And I remember sleeping in the parking lot in my Mustang and taking a shower at the Marriott gym to be able to attend it. And my credit card didn't go through for $200-300, whatever the ticket was. And obviously I didn't want to be laughed at, so I kind of parked in the corner. But I will never forget this, right? That exposure to people who had done a lot changed my mind, right? So it's the first time when I went there, obviously I couldn't pay, my credit card wouldn't go through. And at the time, Mike's assistant was this lady by the name of Miss Kathy, and Miss Kathy literally had pity on me, and so gave me the front row seat to sit on. She could clearly see that I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I want to be a grown man, and so I'm hiding what I'm feeling, and I'm feeling ashamed of myself. And I will never forget, right? I'm sitting down and writing notes at the front row, and in the middle of, and Mike always used to have a yellow pad and a point one, right? And then he would read the point. Great real estate agents prospect every single day, right? And then he would pontificate on that point. Point two, point three. And over a 3-day period, he would have anywhere from 450 to 500 points, and everything was point by point by point by point. And each time he would read the line, and then he would pontificate on it, right? And this was his style of delivery, and a very disciplined approach, that it's in the middle of a point and it's time is up, he would stop right then and there. He would start exactly on the dot and stop. That's just how kind of Mike was. And I'll never forget, he's making some sort of a point. I'm writing down notes. I'm drinking a Coke, and I'm sitting in the front row. And Mike stops in the middle of a point. And he's like, "You, young man, stand up." And I'm looking around like this, 1,500 people, as far as I recall it, a lot of people. And I'm like, and now I'm like embarrassed, like, what did I do? So I'm looking around as if it's somebody else. He goes, no, you, stand up. And I'm like, shit. Because Mike was very to the point, and boom, right? Any point he wanted to say, he would hit you with a hammer. He's like, "What are you drinking?" Right? And I'm like, "Well, it's a Coke." So I hold it up to him like that at stage, and he takes the Coke and he just throws it. I mean, can you imagine at a 3-day, right? I think a Coke would just throw it and splatters all over the back screen, right? I mean, this is Mike. Right? And now I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to say. This is my first time at a big event like this. I'm thinking everybody's laughing at me. I'm embarrassed. I'm like, I didn't know what is wrong that I did in it. And he's like, "Sit down," right? And he just moves on with his point. Now, just when half an hour later, I think, okay, maybe he forgot about this incident. I'm like, at the break, people are going to laugh at me. And the lady next to him, he's like, "Oh, he must like you. That's why he's picking on you," right? And I'm like, well, the strange way of liking somebody. But I mean, clearly I was a young guy, 19 years old at the time. And in the middle of a point, he stops again. He's like, "You, stand up." I'm like, oh shit, what did I do now, right? And I remember he goes to me, buy stock in Coke. Don't drink that shit. It'll kill you. Sit down. And I'm like, oh my God. So I till this day, if I drink Coke, maybe this much, and that too once in 6 months, right? I gave up drinking. I used to drink 10 or 12 cans of Coke a day at the time. Foolish, but that was my thing. I was addicted to Coke, and I haven't had Coke since. So it was kind of Mike's exposure in my life was somebody who was so out of the box and so beyond the norm that it never made any sense to me. And I'll never forget, there was a guy that he used to have come and speak at his events that was a marketing expert at the time. His name was Dr. Gunther Claus, right? He was a marketing guru at this point. And Mike would have him and Mike Vance. Mike Vance was the first dean for Disney University, right? So he used to work for Walt Disney, and he was one of the key players that bought all the land in Florida for Walt Disney. So Mike Vance and Dr. Gunther Claus and Earl Nightingale, these were the three people that Mike used to follow when Mike was in his 20s. And he worked for Earl Nightingale actually here in Chicago, downtown. Because Earl Nightingale Conant Corporation, which is one of the biggest motivational tapes, books, records at the time, that was Earl Nightingale. And one of the first recordings that Earl Nightingale did, which is called The Strangest Secret in the World, right? Wonderful recording in that baritone voice of his. That came from there, and Mike worked for him. And so I'll never forget this, that I remember he said he was coming to Chicago. And I didn't live in Chicago at the time, but he's like, if you want, you can come hang out. So, and Mike says, this is how he's like 6:06, we're going to be down, right? And knowing how Mike and Gunther were, like, I'm like, you better be there 5:30, because if these guys show up and you're not on time, I mean, hell is going to break loose. And this is 6:06, not in the evening, this is the morning, right? I'm like, but whatever. So I remember me and this other guy, and I, for the love of God, I can't recall his name today. I will never forget this. So we're at the hotel lobby, Mike Ferry and Dr. Gunther Claus coming down. And we're all supposed to meet for breakfast, right? Who the hell has breakfast 6:06 in the morning? But who am I to question, right? So we meet, right? And it was hi, hello, this is Dr. Gunther Claus. Obviously, I'd heard Dr. Gunther Claus speak, and I'm like, oh my God, he's a walking legend at the time to me. And first words out of Dr. Gunther Claus was short guy, like piercing blue eyes and a thick German accent. The guy that was with me is another real estate agent. He goes, well, young man, have you ever seen fat old people? I mean, this is no hi, hello, nothing, right? I mean, this is the first statement out of his mouth. He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. I'm like, dude, he's talking to you, not me, right? So he didn't know what to say. He's like, well, no. He's like, well, they have a heart attack and they die. So maybe you should think about losing some weight. It'd be good for you. His way of putting, basically giving you medicine or advice was, boom, hit your head with a hammer, right? As interesting incidents that maybe 9, 10 o'clock, I had never I had no idea what Michigan Mile was, and in Chicago, and we were staying, I still remember there's a Marriott hotel over there on State Street where we're staying. And I didn't have any concept of it because I'd never been in a big city like Chicago at the time. So this is my first time visiting since I was born in Chicago, but I was a baby when I left. So I had no concept. So as far as I'm concerned, Chicago, New York, to me, was all the same at the time. So we start walking up and down the street, right? On Michigan Mile, as everybody knows, there are all these expensive shops, right? Designer stores and all this stuff. Now, before this, in my life, I've never been to these kind of stores, right? And I still remember it's Mike, me, this other guy, and Dr. Vance. So I'm like, Mike, what are we exactly going to do today? He's like, well, you're going to get out of your comfort zone. I'm like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, we're going to go to places where you've never been, but you should go there because they sell stuff you can't afford today, but someday in the future you will afford. Now today, I'm dating myself. This is 25, maybe 30 years ago almost, right? No, yeah, 25 years ago. Today, people have exposure because of all the social media, the internet. I mean, all the stuff in the world we have exposure to, places we've never been, things we've never experienced, but yet we get to see through the medium of social media, through YouTube, so on and so forth, right? At the time, you'd see that in a magazine, right? So I'll never forget this. Like, we're going in stores like the Prada, whatever the designer thing was at that time. And I'm like, I mean, the cost of this at the time, right? At this point, I'm barely making 75, 80,000, whatever I was making at the time. I mean, clearly, I did not have the money to be able to afford any of this stuff at all whatsoever, period. I couldn't imagine anybody being able to afford this kind of stuff. And I remember we went to the store. Now, I don't even know exactly what this store was. I don't know if it was Hermes. I don't know, because clearly at the time I had no idea what Hermes is or whatever it is. So I don't know if this is a Birkin bag, but from my understanding, a Birkin bag is made for women. But I have no idea. We went to the store. I'll never forget this. Dr. Claus points to this kind of a briefcase-looking thing, right? And he goes, "Is this baby alligator?" The lady goes, "Well, yeah," right? I mean, it's a pretty fancy store. And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to take it," right? And so, whatever. So I see the price tag or whatever was on there. I'm thinking, so about $2,300. This is at that time. Yeah. And so he takes it, and he doesn't carry anything. So he takes his keys of a Rolls Royce, he puts it in there, and shuts the bag. And so now we're walking. Now I'm obviously keeping my mouth shut because I have no idea what these guys are going to respond with, the kind of responses these guys have. So Mike goes, he's like, "You realize he just bought the bag?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "You realize what that costs?" I'm like, "I think $2,300. Now, to me, $2,300, right? At that time, might as well be a bloody fortune, right? Because who buys a bag for $2,300? This is might have 20 years ago, right? That was a lot of money, $2,300 at that time. And he's like, "No, it's not $2,300. It's $23,000. I mean, I didn't know even what to say, right? I had no concept at that point in my life. Somebody could buy a briefcase. Why? Just because, right? I just couldn't even fathom at the time. And people who don't have much exposure, they'll say, "Well, that's stupid," right? Why would you spend money on that? Or that's not, give the money to the poor or give whatever, right? People will make a point. Can you imagine being able to walk in to a store, not have to think twice, and just buy something for $23,000? Right? I mean, it just sounds crazy. Yet it is a matter of perspective, right? Funny incidents happened the other day. I went to pick up some food somewhere, and this guy walks out, and he's like, "What does something like that cost?" So I had the Ferrari, and I'm like, "Well, somewhere around, anywhere, depending on what you get, about 280, 300 and up," right? So he's like, "Man, for $300,000, I can buy 10 of the cars that he was driving." He was driving Toyota or something he was driving. And I'm like, "Right." He's like, "Well, why would you want that?" I'm like, "Well, because I want a Ferrari, you want a Toyota. Nothing wrong with it. It's just that you want what you want. There's nothing wrong with what you want. that's just what you want. He's like, well, that's kind of crazy, man. I'm like, well, somebody else will look at it and say, hey, I can buy a used Hyundai for $3,000. Driving a car that's $30,000 is crazy, right? Somebody else in some other country may say, well, why would you want to drive a car? You're much more efficient, and I don't travel much, so I just have a bicycle. Because having a car, spending that much on fuel is crazy. And he's like, well, he looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, listen, the difference is this, that based on the amount, I didn't say this to him, but think about this, right? That at that time, when I saw somebody buy a $23,000 briefcase, just because of baby alligator, whatever the heck that thing was, to me, I had no concept of it. I couldn't even understand why somebody would do something like that and how somebody could afford something like that. Another such incident happened with Mike was we go to the Rolls-Royce dealership. First time I made $100,000 ever in real estate in my life, right? And I remember calling Mike. I was like, man, I'm so excited. I made $100,000 this year. And I don't know what month it was. I remember distinctly living in Pittsburgh at the time. So there used to be a flight from Pittsburgh Airport directly to LAX. And typical Mike fashion, he goes, get on the airplane. And I'm like, on what airplane? LAX flight. And I'm like, now? He's like, no, in the morning, right? And this is like late at night, mind you. And I'm like, for what? He's like, shut up, get on the airplane and buy a first class ticket. Now, I had never bought a first class ticket in my life. I didn't even know if my credit card would go through. I had no concept of what a first class ticket would cost, right? I mean, how am I supposed to know? And I remember, and he's like, you better have the ticket stub because I want to make sure you're not lying, because you need to experience what a better quality of life looks like. So I buy this ticket, whatever the damn ticket was, clearly, I'm like, oh my God, this is so much money for me to spend on a last minute first class ticket. And I will never forget this. We go to the Rolls-Royce dealership with him because he needed a service or whatever the heck he needed. I mean, this is a really nice brand new Rolls-Royce as far as I'm concerned, right? And I had never been in a Rolls-Royce in my life. So I'm like, oh my God, this is like a James Bond car. And we're coming back. So 2 hours, he left me at the dealership. I don't know where he disappeared. I had no idea. He told the sales guy, this guy one day is going to buy a Rolls-Royce. I mean, I'm like, listen, man, I can't afford a wheel, right? This is what I'm thinking. Of course, I'm not going to tell the guy, but this is what I'm thinking. And 2 hours later comes back. He's like, okay, let's go. And we're going back in a different color one. This one looks even newer than the first one. So I make a mistake of opening my mouth and going, hey, Mike, is this a loaner? I mean, he slams on the brake, LA traffic, right? Middle of the afternoon, slams his brake. He's like, is there an L written on my head? I'm like, what? I mean, I'm like, I don't even know what to do here. And, I got a whack job that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, that I don't want to piss him off. And he's going like, is there an L written on my head? And I'm like, well, no. So he goes, losers drive loaners. I'm like, man, I just thought we went to a dealership for a service and maybe your car was getting serviced, so they gave you a different one. He's like, no, 12,000 miles, I bought a new car. I'm like, what? Who the hell buys a new car at 12,000 miles? I mean, can you even imagine this concept? See, at the time, I'm like, this makes no sense. I mean, a normal human being, even people who are well off, generally are not going to change a car with 12,000 miles. See, the problem was this. My frame of reference was different than his frame of reference. And this is the same thing that happened with the Ferrari that day. So after I bought the Rolls-Royce, right, a few years ago, I realized why he was saying what he was saying. So what happens with a very, very expensive car, you pay $400,000 or so, $500,000 for a car. So what they do is they try to get you, rather than most people who'll buy a Rolls-Royce, they'll just go and basically pay cash for it. That's your Rolls-Royce buyer. Rolls-Royce buyer is not the same as a Corvette buyer, is not the same as a Lamborghini buyer, is certainly, so generally people who buy a Ferrari are going to buy a Rolls-Royce. right? Lamborghini people will not buy a Rolls Royce. It's a different type of a crowd of people, right? And so generally a Porsche buyer is going to be better off financially than a Lambo buyer, right? Lambo buyers are going to tend to be generally younger. It's a different profile of a person. Different people are attracted to different cars. So a lot of people who are buying a Rolls Royce, like say the Chicago dealership here, they're walking in and they're like, well, I'll take that car. It's end of story, right? Because it's not that they have to qualify to buy a car. They have more than enough money to have to think about it, right? So that's one end of the buyer. The other end of the buyer is somebody who can barely afford it. So then Rolls-Royce will make them prove that they can be in that car, right? I mean, it's that sort of thing. But what happens is a lot of the times they would rather put you, rather than basically selling you the car outright, they want you to do a lease on the car. The reason they want you to lease the car for 2 years is because the lease will renew. At that time, most people who have a Rolls Royce, they're not going to put that much miles on it, right? This is their third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth car, right? They already have a bunch of cars. And this is kind of like one of those fun cars that people will buy. And generally, these are people who have a good chunk of change. And so what happens is when the car gets 7,000, 8,000 miles, and a lot of these cars have 3,000, 4,000 miles, 5,000 miles on them, basically they'll bring it back and the dealership will put them in another car because it's almost a brand spanking new car. The smell of leather is not even out of it. They can sell it to another buyer that can pick up that car with another lease payment, and the business and the dealership, the company, they can sell a service package with it, a bunch of stuff. That is that buyer that can't afford a brand new Rolls Royce, but will buy a used one. And they will basically take them to town with it. That's why on some of these exotics, they do what they do. Now, I didn't have any point of reference at the time, right? So when he said to me that at 12,000 miles, like when my car started now, I think my car has 11,000 miles on it, I bought it out. So I was like, well, I'm not going to go buy another one. So I just bought out the car. But because I had a lease and now I bought out the car, I got a really, really, really good price to just buy the car from the dealership, from the company. Generally, people will just give it back and just pick up another lease. And what is interesting is today, that makes perfect sense to me, that had I wanted to basically buy the new Ghost that came out last year, right, I would have basically just given my car back. Now I'm already approved through Rolls-Royce, so I don't have to go through proving assets, this, that, all that kind of stuff. And I just pick up a car, right? Literally, I could walk in, give them the keys for this one, and I pick up the next one because they know, obviously, I have a payment history with them now. I chose not to do that. But when Mike said this, and I tell this story for this reason, that at that time, I remember asking him, what does something like this cost? And I remember him going, it's $4,000, $4,500 a month. This is what he said. And he said it in a flippant way. And I'm like, that's a month, right? I had no concept that you could make a car payment for $4,000 or $4,500. I mean, guys, that's $40,000, $50,000 for one car payment a year, right? I mean, this is just like unbelievable to me at the time. And what my point of today's stories is that whether it was him buying a Rolls Royce, whether it was somebody spending $23,000 on a briefcase, that it is all a point of reference, meaning in reference to what you earn and where your income comes from. Is it coming from running on a treadmill, or is it coming from cash flow properties? And I never remember them saying cash flow at the time, but I still remember saying to Mike, how can he afford a $23,000 worth of a briefcase? And I'll never forget this. He's like, you've heard of Beverly Hills? I'd never been to Beverly Hills in my life at the time. He's like, you know what Beverly Hills is? I'm like, yeah, it's somewhere in California, right? I mean, I didn't even know Beverly Hills was in LA. But he's like, in Beverly Hills, Dr. Claus owns a lot of the stores And so by stores, he meant was he owns the real estate where all those retail stores and restaurants sit. He's like, he owns half of that shit. This is how he said it. And so I'm like, well, I thought he was in the business of doing marketing seminars and marketing. He does marketing consulting for a lot of big companies, right? For Fortune 500 companies. He's like, yeah, but that's his business, but his investments is what pay for this stuff. He's not spending earned money. He didn't talk about cash flow, but not understanding that this was basically cash flow income that Dr. Klaus was spending. It's funny because Mike said another thing one day, and he's like, you should always own the office building where your business is in, like this office building, right? It's 15,000 square foot building. The business pays for the building. So at the end of the day, obviously, I benefit in the long run. I'll benefit because of it, because the business is paying for the building. And I remember this because he's like, something? That whatever you do for a living, if you don't own enough real estate, you'll really never have to show for it because you'll go through all your earnings. And he's like, I own some office buildings. So at the time where his office was, he used to own the office building, and other tenants on the second, third, fourth floor, whatever it was, they were paying him rent. He's like, there are two types of people who earn income and then have to spend it, and then people who have income coming in because other people occupy their buildings, and then they get to spend that. And the way I say it today is that there are two types of people. Some people count their wealth in the size of the house that they live in. I count my wealth in the number of houses other people live that I own. See, either you can basically have a big house that you live in and that's all you have, which is the case for most people. But I believe the better way of looking at it is that if you have lots of houses that other people live in, that is true wealth. So hopefully you found today's story inspirational. Hopefully it gets you fired up. And we all have different incidences that we draw from at different types of our lives. And what we all are is we all are a part of our experiences, right? You are who you are today because of what you have experienced or what you have not experienced in your life. Having said that, again, thank you for being a part of BRRRR Cashflow Investors. And please make sure you invite some of your friends, invite some of your family. And remember, the 3-day is coming, and it's on July 21, 22, 23. Already, we are pretty much out of the VIP tickets. So that is almost sold out for the VIPs. So regular tickets are only ones that are going to be probably left. So make sure you register, andrewholmesevents.com, andrewholmesevents.com. That's July 21, 22, and 23. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good day and have a safe